Reckoning at high noon. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, swirling around the weathered wooden buildings of Deadwood like restless spirits. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the main street to a shimmering haze. Sheriff Caleb Stone squinted at the horizon, his hand instinctively resting on the worn leather of his gun belt. A knot of unease tightened in his gut. Deadwood was simmering, a pressure cooker about to blow. The source of the tension was the Philosopher, a bandit whose reputation was as much built on his cryptic pronouncements as his ruthless efficiency. He'd swept into Deadwood like a desert storm, his gang leaving a trail of empty safes and cold corpses in their wake. But it wasn't just the robberies. It was the way they were done, the almost theatrical flair, the strange messages left behind, philosophical riddles scrawled in blood. Adding to the sheriff's woes was a string of bizarre murders. Each victim, seemingly unconnected, was found with a playing card tucked into their pocket: the fool, the hermit, the hanged man. The townsfolk whispered of dark omens and cursed the Philosopher's name. Into this powder keg of a town rode Elias Thorne, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose and a stack of books strapped to his saddle. He wasn't the image of a gunslinger, but Sheriff Stone, desperate for answers, saw something in the newcomer's keen eyes and quiet demeanor. Thorne, it turned out, had a mind like a steel trap, a knack for deciphering codes and unraveling puzzles. "These ain't random killings, Sheriff," Thorne said, tracing the pattern of the playing cards on the sheriff's desk. "It's a twisted game. The Philosopher's playing out some grand, demented design." Stone grunted. "Sounds like the ramblings of a madman." "Maybe," Thorne conceded, "but even madmen have a logic. We just have to find it." Their investigation led them down a rabbit hole of Deadwood's secrets, uncovering a web of deceit and long-buried grudges. They discovered that the victims were all connected, their pasts intertwined with a land grab decades earlier, a scheme that had left some rich and others ruined. The Philosopher, it seemed, was not just a bandit, but an avenger. As Thorne deciphered the Philosopher's cryptic messages, the clock ticked down to high noon. The final card in the Philosopher's macabre game was the Ace of Spades. Stone knew what that meant: a showdown. The Philosopher and his gang rode into Deadwood at noon, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thudding of hooves. He was a tall figure, his face hidden behind a bandana, his eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. "Sheriff Stone," his voice echoed through the dusty street, "you have meddled in my performance. Now, the curtain falls." Stone stepped out into the street, Thorne at his side. "Your performance ends here, Philosopher." The air crackled with tension. Guns were drawn. The townsfolk huddled in doorways, their faces pale. Stone knew he was outgunned, but he wouldn't back down. He'd sworn to uphold the law, even in this lawless land. But as the Philosopher raised his hand, a glint of metal flashing in the sun, Thorne cried out, "Wait!" He pointed to a symbol carved into the Philosopher's gun handle. "That's not the Ace of Spades, it's the Joker." The Philosopher froze, his masked face turning towards Thorne. The Joker. The wild card. The unexpected twist. Before anyone could react, a shot rang out, not from Stone, nor the Philosopher, but from a darkened window overlooking the street. The Philosopher staggered, clutching his chest, and crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted. The gang scattered, guns blazing. Stone and his deputies returned fire. But amidst the pandemonium, one question remained: who had fired the shot? And what did the Joker card truly signify? The reckoning at high noon was far from over. The true game, it seemed, had just begun. The echoes of gunfire faded, leaving a thick, acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. Sheriff Stone, his ears ringing, surveyed the scene. 2 of the Philosopher's gang lay dead in the dust, the others having scattered like tumbleweeds in a whirlwind. But his attention was fixed on the Philosopher, lying still in the street, a dark stain blooming on his chest. Stone knelt beside him, cautiously turning him over. The bandana slipped away, revealing a face that was surprisingly young, almost boyish. His eyes, though, were filled with a chilling emptiness. Who shot you?" Stone asked, but the Philosopher's gaze was fixed on something beyond, his breath rattling in his throat. He coughed, a fleck of blood appearing on his lips. He whispered a single word, barely audible, "Checkmate," and then went still. Stone looked up at Thorne, who was examining the philosopher's gun. He said, "Checkmate," Stone said, his voice heavy. "What do you make of it?" Thorne frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's still the game, Sheriff. But the rules have changed. Someone else is playing now." Stone nodded grimly. He knew Thorne was right. The philosopher's death hadn't brought peace to Deadwood, it had merely shifted the power dynamic. Someone else was pulling the strings, a puppet master operating in the shadows. Their attention was drawn to a commotion near the saloon. Deputy Johnson emerged, dragging a struggling figure behind him. It was the saloon owner, Bess, her face flushed and her eyes wide with fear. "I saw her, Sheriff," Johnson exclaimed. "She was in that window, the one overlooking the street. Just after the philosopher went down." Stone's gaze narrowed. He'd known Bess for years. She was a shrewd businesswoman, but he'd never pegged her as a killer. "Bess, what's going on?" Bess stammered, I didn't do anything, Sheriff. I swear. I was just watching." Thorne stepped forward, his eyes scrutinizing Bess's face. "Did you see who fired the shot?" Bess shook her head, her blonde hair falling over her face. It was too fast. I couldn't see." Stone wasn't convinced. He'd learned in his years as a lawman that fear could make people do strange things. He needed to find out the truth. "Johnson, lock her up," he ordered. "We'll talk to her later." As Johnson led Bess away, Stone turned to Thorne. "What do you think, Elias? Did she do it?" Thorne hesitated. "I'm not sure, Sheriff. Something doesn't feel right. Bess always seemed practical. Killing the philosopher in broad daylight doesn't fit." Stone rubbed his tired eyes. He was starting to feel like he was drowning in a sea of riddles. "So, where does that leave us?" Thorne looked around at the dusty street, the abandoned buildings, the silent townspeople peering from behind curtains. "We have to find out who benefits from the philosopher's death. Who gains the most from this, checkmate?" He pointed to the playing card that had fallen from the philosopher's hand, the Joker. "This card, it's the key. It represents chaos, unpredictability. It means anything is possible." Just then, a young boy ran up to Stone, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Sheriff, I found this." It was tucked under the philosopher's body. Stone unfolded the paper. It was another riddle, written in the philosopher's distinctive, cryptic style. It read, "When the queen falls, the jack will rise. The serpent's embrace will bring the prize." Stone and Thorne exchanged a look. The game was far from over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. They were caught in a web of intrigue, where everyone was a suspect, and the stakes were higher than ever. The true reckoning was yet to come. The queen falls, the jack will rise. The serpent's embrace will bring the prize, Stone read aloud, the words hanging heavy in the still air. He looked at Thorne, his brow furrowed. "What intonation does it mean?" Thorne tapped his spectacles, his eyes scanning the scene. "The queen, that could be Bess," he mused. She was the saloon owner, a prominent figure in town, and now she's in jail, effectively fallen to dot. "And the jack?" Stone asked, thinking aloud. "Who could that be?" Thorne's gaze drifted to Deputy Johnson, who was standing guard outside the jail. "Johnson," he said slowly. He's ambitious, eager to prove himself. He arrested Bess, perhaps he's trying to rise in stature. But the serpent's embrace? Stone pressed. "That's the part that's got me stumped." Suddenly, a glint of recognition flashed in Thorne's eyes. "The serpent," he exclaimed, "it's not a literal serpent, Sheriff. It's a metaphor. Think of something that coils, that constricts, that holds something precious." Stone's mind raced. What in Deadwood fit that description? His gaze fell on the town's bank, a solid brick building with a heavy iron door. The bank, he breathed. It's the bank. It holds the town's wealth, it's like a serpent coiled around its treasure. Exactly, Thorne said. And the prize, that's likely the gold stored within. A cold dread settled in Stone's stomach. If Johnson was involved, and if he was after the bank's gold, they had to act fast. Johnson! Stone barked, his voice ringing out across the street. Get over here! Johnson hurried over, a confused look on his face. Yes, Sheriff? I want you to tell me everything you know about the Philosopher's gang, Stone demanded. And don't leave anything out. Johnson stammered, but Sheriff, I already told you everything. Tell me again, Stone interrupted, his voice hardening. And this time, I want the truth. Johnson shifted uneasily, avoiding Stone's gaze. He recounted his story, but Stone could sense he was holding something back. You're lying, Stone said flatly. I can see it in your eyes. What are you hiding, Johnson? Sweat beaded on Johnson's forehead. He hesitated, then blurted out, Okay, Sheriff, okay. There was something, the Philosopher, he had a map. I overheard him talking about it with one of his men. A map to hidden gold. Where is it? Stone demanded. I don't know. Johnson protested. I swear. I just heard them talking about it. I thought maybe if I could find it. Stone exchanged a grim look with Thorne. It was all falling into place. Johnson wasn't just ambitious, he was greedy, desperate for the Philosopher's hidden treasure. And he was willing to do anything to get it, even frame Bess and take advantage of the chaos following the Philosopher's death. Johnson, you're under arrest, Stone said, drawing his gun. Johnson's eyes widened in panic. He reached for his own weapon, but Stone was faster. A shot rang out, and Johnson crumpled to the ground. Stone holstered his gun, his face etched with weariness. He looked at Thorne. It's over, he said. Thorne nodded. For now, Sheriff. But I have a feeling this isn't the end of it. The Joker is still out there, and the game continues. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Deadwood, Stone knew Thorne was right. They had solved one riddle, but countless others remained. The town's secrets were like layers of an onion, each one peeling away to reveal another, darker truth. The reckoning at high noon had brought a temporary peace, but the true cost of justice in this lawless land was still yet to be paid. And Stone knew, with a sinking heart, that the price would be high. The dust settled over Deadwood, the long shadows stretching like grasping fingers across the deserted street. Sheriff Stone stood beside Thorne, the weight of the day pressing down on him like a physical burden. Johnson's body lay where he'd fallen, another life claimed by the greed and violence that plagued this lawless land. We recovered the map, Stone said, his voice flat. It leads to a hidden mine, deep in the mountains. The Philosopher's stash. Thorne nodded. And with Johnson gone, there's no one left to challenge us. Stone looked at Thorne, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But at what cost, Elias? We've brought down the Philosopher, exposed Johnson's treachery, but have we really brought justice? Thorne considered this for a moment. Justice isn't always clean, Sheriff. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it leaves scars. But it's necessary. It's the only way to maintain order in a world that often descends into chaos. Stone sighed. Order, or just a temporary reprieve? The gold's still out there, Elias. It'll attract more vultures, more trouble. That's true, Thorne conceded. But we can't let that deter us. We have to keep fighting, keep striving for what's right, even when it seems like an impossible task. Stone looked out at the town, the flickering lights in the windows like tiny beacons in the darkness. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe justice isn't a destination, but a journey. A constant struggle against the darkness. They decided to leave the gold where it was for now. It was a dangerous temptation, a magnet for the worst kind of men. Better to let it lie hidden, a reminder of the greed and violence it could unleash. The next morning, Stone rode out of Deadwood, Thorne by his side. They rode towards the rising sun, leaving the town behind them. As they crested a hill, Stone looked back at Deadwood, a small cluster of buildings in the vast landscape. "We'll be back," he said quietly. "We have to be. This town, it needs us." Thorne nodded. "It needs more than just lawmen, Sheriff. It needs hope. It needs the belief that even in the darkest corners of the world, justice can prevail." They continued their ride, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beat of their horses' hooves. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. But Stone knew that they couldn't give up. They had to keep fighting for what was right, keep striving for a world where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. The moral of the story: justice is not a single act, but a continuous struggle. It's a journey, not a destination. Even when faced with overwhelming odds and moral ambiguities, the pursuit of what's right, the fight against greed and corruption, is a battle that must be constantly waged. For in the face of darkness, even a small flicker of hope can light the way. Join the adventure with the Western Echoes, Cowboy Tales Unleashed. If you're loving our cowboy stories and captivating tales, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our future posts. Saddle up and ride along with us.